We're accustomed to looking at the Holocaust through the lens of the victims. Millions of them. But we can't really understand the terrible events that took place without considering the motives of the perpetrators. When did the final solution actually take shape? Can we pinpoint the exact moment in which Hitler's madness was transformed from wild rhetorical flourishes to serious design? One thing is clear: nothing was set in stone, even well into the Nazi reign of terror. Things could have taken a very different course had it not been for decisions taken in 1 year in particular. But first, we need to consider the question of how the Nazis chose to govern and to rule. Were the German people cowering in fear as Hitler forced them to do his bidding? Or did Hitler and all his minions prefer to rule through consensus? Truth be told, the Nazis well understood that you don't rule with terror. You have to have your own people squarely behind you. In fact, we have to be careful about saying that the Germans and other peoples were under the Nazis. In reality, people consented. They were actually happy with the system. And why shouldn't they be? After all, 50 days a year were holidays devoted to the Nazi Party. Hitler's birthday was an especially prominent day of celebration. People willingly went to great stadiums at Nuremberg and elsewhere for mass Nazi rallies. You have to keep the people stirred up and excited. Complacency is no good. And the Nazi leaders began to fear it. As far as the Nazis were concerned, a fascist state like Spain under Franco amounted to stagnation. There must be an ongoing cultural revolution, and anyone who might prevent that revolution from continuing had to be removed. By 1937, the tension between competing factions in the Nazi Party had come to a head. Those who favored institutionalizing and settling down the Nazi revolution were opposed by the radicals, and vice versa. Hitler was actually afraid that he himself might be removed. After all, people were still suffering the effects of the Great Worldwide Depression. So Hitler began to act, to stir afresh the fires of the Nazi Revolution. He remilitarized the Rhineland, which had been demilitarized by the Treaty of Versailles. The Nazi Minister of Finance, Hjalmar Schacht, as one of the conservative voices in the Nazi regime, was mostly concerned about the German economy. And he feared that any such rearmament would cause a spike in inflation. Consequently, Hitler never even showed Schacht his plan. As it turned out, 1937 proved to be the pivotal year in the Nazi Revolution. In that year, Hitler undertook a twofold radicalization of his regime. First, there was to be an internal purge of anyone contaminated with the so-called Jewish spirit. Schacht was removed from his post. The German ambassadors to Tokyo and Rome were recalled. Opposition voices were imprisoned, including clergymen. On Sunday, June 27th, 1937, Lutheran minister Martin Niemöller concluded his sermon as follows. We have no more thought of using our own powers to escape the arm of the authorities than had the apostles of old. No more are we ready to keep silent at man's behest when God commands us to speak. For it is and must remain the case that we must obey God rather than man. Three days later, I was arrested, spending the next 8 months in Berlin's Moabit prison. I was later convicted of abuse of the pulpit and for taking collections, and sentenced to 7 months imprisonment. But I was released on time served. While leaving the courtroom, I was placed in protective custody by the Gestapo and interned in the Sachsenhausen and Dachau concentration camps until 1945. Of the horrors experienced in those hells, I will leave to others to recount. Upon my liberation at the end of the war, whatever joy I had was smothered by the reality of the harsh aftermath. My wife Elsa said of me, seid alles schwarz. He sees everything black. And yet I managed to find light in this new darkness. I became president of the Evangelical Church in Hesse in 1947, and president of the World Council of Churches in 1961. My legacy, however, is overshadowed by a warning about the consequences of not opposing tyranny at the first instance of its rising. I am mostly remembered for a little poem I wrote. First, they came for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time there was no one left to speak up for me. As Hitler continued his turn toward radicalism in 1937, he himself became Chief of Staff and Minister of War. Another radical, Ribbentrop, was now Foreign Minister. The post-Schacht economy was now being run by Hermann Goering. The second part of Hitler's radicalization was external. A decision was taken to invade the Soviet Union. While not carried out until 1941, the infamous Operation Barbarossa, it was decided upon in 1937. As Holocaust scholar Yehuda Bauer writes, on November 5th, 1937, Hitler informed his chief generals and confidants that Germany was to be prepared for war within the next few years, that Czechoslovakia and Poland would be eliminated, and that Germany would expand into Russian territory, as recorded in the protocols by Officer Friedrich Hossbach. The so-called Hossbach Memorandum is the smoking gun scholars need to demonstrate that 1937 was in fact the pivotal year. Hitler didn't have to take a radical turn. Nothing was set in stone. He might have listened to his finance minister, Hjalmar Schacht. And if he had, there may well have been no such thing as a Holocaust. But he decided that he didn't need professionals in his government. He needed idealists, purists. As it turned out, the radicalism of 1937 brought into focus the fateful year of 1938, and ultimately the final solution itself. It was Jewish policy that was the cornerstone of his radical turn and was designed to help consolidate his Reich. Hitler had to cure what he conceived as the disease of the body politic. That involved removing leaders of his own government, conservatives who had been Judaized. Though they may have been good anti-Semites, they were nonetheless infected with the Jewish spirit. As far as Hitler was concerned, everything that was against him, all opposition voices, even the behavior of the Allies, was Jewish spirit. Even as late as 1943, when the Jews had been completely removed from German soil, the propaganda continued. The Jewish spirit is still here. In 1938, a new wave of anti-Jewish steps was unleashed. It was all about getting back to the origins of the National Socialist Party. Back to basics, as it were. According to Nazi racial ideology, Germans don't confiscate property, they Aryanize Jewish property. Communists confiscate, we Aryanize. In confiscation, the property goes to the elite. In Aryanization, it's distributed to everybody. The procedure was adopted not just in Germany, but in every country the Nazis conquered. A public auction would be held, in which Jews were forced to sell their property for a small percentage of its value. Let the people enjoy a criminal system. So when harsher steps were taken, no one would protest. By now, the Nazis were well prepared to burn their bridges with the civilized world. But everything must proceed according to good German order. The auctions were carefully organized, starting and ending at specified hours. And the bulk of the populace, who profited from it all, were more than happy to turn a blind eye. They didn't want to know what was happening to the Jews. Let them disappear, it's none of my business. It's not surprising that even at the post-war Nuremberg trials, it was easy for the defendants to say, I didn't know about it. In a sense, the Nazi methodology was able to psychologically entrap entire populations. Even the churches, with the exception of Martin Niemöller, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and other brave opponents of the Nazis, decided that the Jewish question was none of their business. There were even nuns who served as nurses in Hitler's notorious euthanasia hospitals. No one was forced. The Gestapo wasn't like Stalin or Big Brother. The Nazis ruled through consensus. In early 1939, at the 6th anniversary of Hitler's rise to power, his radical turn was strongly in evidence as he delivered his famous prophecy speech. Today, I will once more be a prophet. If the international Jewish financiers, inside and outside of Europe, succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, then the result will not be the Bolshevization of the earth, and thus the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. Though Hitler often went off script during his remarks, on this occasion, he paused carefully, read every word. In his mind, there was no criminal intent here. It was all predestined. Hitler repeated the same speech in 1942, underscoring his radical intent, in which he never wavered. Even as the tide of war turned decisively against Germany, the radicalism continued. In February 1943, propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels delivered his total war speech. It was the quintessence of radicalism. Goebbels concluded, 2,000 years of Western history are in danger. And he blamed Germany's failures on the Jews. While Goebbels referred to Soviet mobilization as devilish, he explained, we cannot overcome the Bolshevist danger unless we use equivalent, though not identical, methods in a total war. The speech launched a mobilization campaign that arguably prolonged the war under the slogan, Und Sturm brich los, and storm break loose. Is it even conceivable that Hitler might have chosen a less radical path? Might different circumstances have prompted him to side with the institutionalizers in his government rather than the most stridently genocidal voices? The only thing we can be sure of is that Hitler's dream remained. Jews were to disappear. And all that would remain would be the abstract Jewish spirit.